Hi, and welcome to Business Unusual. I'm Liz Whitehead, co-mastermind at Diversity Masterminds, and I'm here with Heather Cox.
The other co-mastermind of Diversity Masterminds.
And our guest today, Dr. Carol Parker Walsh. Hi, Carol.
Hi, how are you?
Good. We're so glad you're here today, and we're going to get into what happens when business unusual becomes business as usual. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Absolutely. Well, I have the honor and privilege of working with high-achieving, smart, intelligent women who are looking to really step into work that's more meaningful and fulfilling for them. They're ready to step up and take control of their careers so they can have the life that they desire and the careers that they deserve.
Awesome.
We need to step back because we need to talk about how amazing this person is here. So because she will not tell you unless we ask her. Let's talk about your career history / education history. Give us a little 60-second bio of Dr. Carol Parker Walsh.
Well, let's see. I started my career. I was just thinking about that literally 30 years ago. And so I started as an employment and labor attorney. I did employment discrimination litigation in Chicago for several years, worked for the Treasury's union and represented ATF agents and IRS agents, customs agents, and members of the FDIC, helped negotiate, bargain huge labor agreements and things of that nature. I transitioned out of practicing law and moved into doing organizational and management consulting and executive coaching and training in one of the largest employers, 10,000 plus organization, working with them throughout every aspect of the organization. And then from there, I went back to school and got not only my master's in human development and organizational development, I got my PhD in social systems and human development with a focus on gender and racial identity development along the lines of systems of oppression and structural inequity, and became associate professor in public health at one of the top MPH programs in the country at the time, then stepped into becoming a director for that program. And then before I launched my own business, I was the associate dean for Graduate University in California, where I helped to organize and bring in students, supervise students, and help them to discover and develop new knowledge that they were putting out in the world in the organizational and employment spaces as well. Had a stint as a director of HR. Actually, I helped develop an HR department for a small transportation company that didn't have one before, but helped to develop their compensation plan, their benefit structure, did a lot of employment training and orientation, and did a lot of education and coaching with the leadership from the president all the way to the vice presidents and the upper level management of the organization. So I've been well entrenched in employment and the organizational world for a lot of years. I not only sued them, but I worked within them to be better and trained them to be exceptionally well, and coach them to be able to be better leaders for the people that they were working for. So, and then also studied it. So I always say from the employment perspective, I definitely have a viewpoint from every angle, which is what really serves my clients so much better in helping them to be successful in their careers and thinking about what they want to do in their careers, because I've looked at it from every possible aspect. I've studied it, worked within it, engaged with it. So I have an understanding of it, and both with the education and experience, that really makes a difference in the work that I do.
Wow. Now that I feel like an underachiever,
let's take 30 years.
so we're in talk together, and she would so when I was an attorney, I'm like, wait, I thought you did what? Well, before I got my master's and my PhD, I'm like, oh my God, I bet. But I think why I was why Dr. C, I will call you Dr. C, or is that your friend Charlotte? Does she go?
You know what? People call me C-Dub.
I love C-Dub. Okay. So the reason I love
Washington, there's UW, because the W, they're like, yeah, C-Dub, CP Dub, or something like that. Yeah. So
CP Dub, because she really has done the entire, women are oftentimes put into buckets, right? They're either, I say this all the time, you have to work like you don't have kids and parent like you don't have a job, right? And one of the things that you do so well with your clients is you bring that all together and you're like, look, it's not going to be pretty all the time. Let's figure out the way that we can make the most, like, make you feel like a whole person and not to compartmentalize yourself, because that's so exhausting.
It is exhausting. And I don't believe in that. I think I wrote something before, but I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in career-life alignment, right? Because you are who you are in every space. And so how do you make sure that everything that you're doing vibes off of you, feels righteous for you, that you can not feel like you're neglecting one from the other? Because balance suggests that you are not giving to one and giving more to the other, as opposed to just making choices about how you're managing your time, putting, giving to create the systems and the environment that really supports you to do the work that you love. And I have kids, right? And still provide for them, be available to them, and to just be available for life. So for me, it's more about career life alignment, right? As opposed to this balancing, juggling act that people are trying to do, which causes them to bifurcate pieces of themselves and not be fully present in everything that they do. And I don't believe in that. So I believe when you can show up authentically in every space, then you feel this ability to engage and not feel like you're struggling or balancing one or the other or overdoing one or the other type of thing.
Yeah. Heather actually did an interview about working from home with kids and for GoDaddy. And, I think GoDaddy was actually asking me, they're like, is there anyone you know? I was like, oh yeah, I've got someone you can talk to.
I know, and Heather's a master. She has 5 kids.
Well, they were like, my favorite part of that whole interview was when I don't think it made the cut, but he was like, so do you feel like you've really bonded with your kids during this time? I'm like, no, I'm not really that kind of mom.
Yeah.
I'm like sitting on the floor building with them. No, but I have seen other things that my presence has impacted, because to your point, I'm not the nurturing, coddling mommy who's going to sit on the floor and play Barbies. I can't stand that stuff. But
right.
My kids play meeting all the time.
Yeah.
My daughter, like, she will hustle and be like, I need to call my clients. Someone's got to need a babysitter right now. And she like starts picking up the phone, calling her clients. So like, I feel like that is a big part of what I've given to them in this time, that they've seen me do more work. Because normally I'm always at the office. When we were all home together, they saw a lot of that kind of come together.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that, because that throws out this whole idea that there's one way to parent, right? Yeah. Which is such crap, right? And the pressure on women, this is why I looked at identity and how we figure out who we are. We are bombarded with so many societal messages of how we're supposed to be, that we lose track of who we really are and creating something that makes sense for us. And that's why, for me, being authentic and knowing yourself, and like how you raise your kids is not how somebody else raises their kids. I'm the same way, Heather. I'm not like, an overly like, oh my God. I remember my son, I thought, I love I was pregnant, a baby. Oh, I'm going to stay home with my kids. And I think he was like 18 months. And I'm like, I need a job. I got to get out of here. I'm like, I cannot watch Barney again. I am not cut out to just be a stay-at-home mom and let my children define my existence. And for women who that's your vibe, bless you for it, but that's just not my vibe. And so, but that's the important thing, is that you have to find what's righteous for you. Right. And that to me is the most important thing. And that dissolves all that kind of guilt about why aren't I doing this, that, and the other. Right. No, I'm, my kids are great. They're in their 20s and they thank me all the time for being the kind of mom that I was. So, I think it all worked out well.
That's awesome. Good. I always say parenting's a long con too. Like, you can't be someone with like a 2-year-old, like, I'm a good mom. It's like, you don't know.
You don't know yet.
No idea.
Right. Exactly. And they only know what you show them. So, after a while, they may start comparing with other parents, but still, my kids are happy that, the fact that they've seen me in positions, they've seen me take other positions, travel for positions, start my own business. I mean, they admire that. So, and it gave them something to think about, that they don't have to follow this one way of being in their own life. And I think that's the best gift I could possibly have given them.
Yeah,
absolutely. So we talked a little bit about it, but what were the things that changed for your clients or for your business during COVID? What were some of the things that had to shift?
Yeah, well, being locked into this, for one.
Your boss?
Yes, exactly. For me, a lot of my work, because I work with clients around the world, had always been, you know, I started to utilize this mechanism more, but at least with, you know, there were times that I would travel, I would show up at, you know, some type of client spaces, do kind of a desk audit with them, see how they're working in their organizational space. Sometimes companies would have me fly out to do that for their clients, for their employees that I was working with. Speaking, obviously, I was doing that face-to-face, you know, flying out to these engagements, and all of that kind of stopped. So from the client perspective, working from this way wasn't something that was so new for me, but trying to figure out how to do speaking engagements and, you know, how to engage with some of the other things that we felt had to be face-to-face in this kind of different forum was definitely a big shift. So yeah, that, you know, Zoom, and also dealing with Zoom fatigue. Right? Because, you know, you were able to kind of turn this off and do other things, but then all of a sudden everybody wanted to Zoom, even my family wanted to Zoom. So it's like, enough is enough.
Yeah. Right.
for doing that. So, you know, yeah, moving things from, that was the biggest obvious one for me, is just moving things from the face-to-face into the virtual space.
And what were some of the lessons you learned? Like, what were some of the key learnings about that?
Well, you know, for me, I learned that you have to figure out how to bring in the personable into the space, right? So instead of it just being always about just business, how do you create the same level of energy and engagement that you would if you were in front of someone? And for me specifically, that came when I did speaking gigs this way, right? And so I had to figure out ways to present my information and present myself in a way that wouldn't cause people to turn their camera off and check their emails.
Yes.
or you know, get on the phone or leave, or things of that nature. So, and it's challenging enough to do that when you're in a big group or in a big audience, but when people actually have the ability to kind of check out very easily, you have to really embed or shift how you're presenting yourself, how you're presenting your materials in a way that keeps people like really engaged and not want to check out, because this option while you're doing this, and then an email ping comes, you know, in the little corner box
text
of your
message,
right, or a text
whatever,
message comes through. But you know, how to really learn how to disengage and be present the way you would face-to-face was one of the biggest things that, you know, I had to learn to shift how to do. So that meant, you know, getting more, you know, animated and I'm adding more things to my slide decks that I otherwise would not have before. I present a lot, so I don't do often a lot of text on my slides anyway, but, you know, embedding videos, embedding other kind of fun, playful things that would keep people engaged, you know, using the polling system on there, asking people for questions, you know, just I was much more engaged with the people that I was speaking with when I was doing keynotes before. It was just me talking and maybe, you know, looking around the room, but it taught me to be a little bit more flexible, adaptable, and creative in, you know, how I show up in the space.
Yeah.
I think the hardest part though about getting animated, and you're pretty animated, but you're not as like, you don't move quite as much as I do. You know, I had this headset that would connect right to my computer, and I was presenting. It was actually while we were doing talk, I had to jump off to this presentation, and I like did something with my hands, and my whole computer fell on the floor and closed the whole application.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be challenging. Yeah, so sometimes I wear these. Yeah, they're actually wireless, but I always forget to charge them, which is why they're hooked up. But for formal things, I try to do a mic. But I have been known, because I do talk with my hands, and I have knocked my mic over, so that has happened lots of times.
Yeah, it's really funny what you say about the energy too, because Heather and I did some videos together. We're doing our course online on demand, and so when we were there, like, I had to ramp up my energy like about 10% or like 90%. And Heather had to tamp hers down. Yeah. So it seemed like we were at the same party, you know?
Right.
And yeah.
I think I asked you this before, but have you done a lot of work with, because you do leadership consulting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leading now is a very different role than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
Right? A year and a half ago, how you lead a team.
Mm-hmm.
Even for teams that were always virtual, it just seems different now.
Yes. Yeah, it is. What happened with a lot of, even with remote workers, what happened with a lot of organizations and leaders is that they felt because either they weren't present, or that we were all forced into this kind of quarantine, that something clicked in their head that, oh, they're not going to be as engaged at work. They're going to be, watching TV or sleeping in, this kind of fear that because we were required to be in the space, even if they were working remotely before, that somehow or other they're not going to be engaging at the same level.
Right.
And so to overcorrect that, what I found or saw that a lot of managers or people in leadership were just overcorrecting. So it became, let's meet every 5 seconds on Zoom. Like, we need to have more meetings on Zoom than we were before, whereas maybe there'd be a check-in once a week, or, a team meeting or things of that nature on a less frequent basis. It just ramped it up. And not only that, they felt they needed to build community. So it's like, let's have more meetings, and let's have happy hours, and let's make sure we're celebrating birthdays, and let's have check-ins. And it just became, and I talked a lot about this, I mean, really the burnout, which last year, the DSM actually added job burnout to, their diagnoses, because people were getting job burnout. But this year, at the end of this year, there was a lot of conversation about remote work burnout, about the Zoom fatigue and the burnout that happened from it. And I think this idea, because we weren't able to engage physically, people just felt this need, and leaders were suffering from this, of just overdoing it, which was causing even more stress on their people. So they were constantly working, they're constantly on this space and not figuring out a way of how to turn it off. And so that caused a lot of, challenges in terms of people's mental and physical well-being. And so that was one of the biggest problems. And so, yes, I've done a lot of work with leaders about, listen, here's when you should have Zoom meetings. Like, don't go crazy because we're in this space. And actually, studies have shown that people's productivity actually have increased in this COVID environment, because people were able to save time on the commute. They were able to be more productive in like spurts of time, as opposed to just showing up in the, how we show up in the office. You get your coffee, you talk to somebody for 20 minutes, you go back and forth to offices, you take a long lunch, you play on, you do a little, shopping while you're right. So in truth, even though people show up in the office space, they're not as productive when they're in a space where they're like, listen, I'm homeschooling 5 kids over here. My spouse or my partner is here as well. I have a limited amount of time to get quiet time and to get focused and get it done. And so let me just focus in and get things and make it happen. And instead of thinking from that perspective and appreciating that, what happened is that kind of old school way of thinking, like, I have to be able to be present and see you and monitor everything you're doing to prove that you're working kind of thinking. And not every organization was like this, but there definitely were a lot of people who were fearful because they weren't sure, what this meant. Instead of overcompensating for that, or instead of thinking that people be more productive, they went the other way and became much more like, we have to do more meeting and more connections. So I've had to like rein a lot of leaders and managers back into figuring out how to be more appreciative and thoughtful about how often they're requiring people to show up in this space, so that their people can actually work and they can actually work, but also figuring out ways, how do you still supervise and manage? And as an employee, how do you still show up? Yes. When you're not in someone's face, so that you're still, so walking that line and negotiating all of that in that space has been a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last year.
It's so interesting. And it's something that's new, right? It's something that's
very new.
And it's something that not everybody even realizes is an issue. Right?
Exactly. So exactly.
Like introspection, like checking out, check yourself, what you got to do.
Yeah. And so for people who tend to show up more and, in the office, or people who are more introverted in the office, how are they negotiating, being able to show up, and not just that they're doing the work, but to show up as like a leader or a superstar if they want a promotion or want to show that they're really engaged. And then also, how can managers foster an environment where people feel like, I respect what you're doing, I respect where you're at, and I appreciate what the work that you're doing while you're away, but still fostering this like engagement and workspace and work environment where people feel heard, respected, supported, and and on and on and on.
Awesome. Well, so, and you guys met at Tuck, so you're part of the
Yeah,
supplier diversity world. So
techies.
yeah,
Hashtag Tucky's 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, the first virtual class, right?
First
Yes.
virtual class, right?
Yeah.
History makers. We're history makers.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we always like to talk about is how are you buying from diverse suppliers? How are you supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, buying Black owned, women owned, and buying from other diverse categories? So what are some things that you do in your business to do that?
Yeah. Well, well, first of all, working with Heather to get certified to make sure everybody
Woo!
knows
That counts.
That counts.
that I am, I mean, besides the obvious that I'm woman and Black owned, but I've just made a very concerted effort to not only educate my audience and educate people around me about searching for Black owned businesses, buying from Black owned businesses, people are giving referrals to ask, is it a Black owned business, to make inquiries about that, and just encouraging others to do the same, but also highlighting them. So I do a newsletter out to like my email list. I do things on Facebook, and I'm always highlighting, for the holidays I did a Black owned and women owned kind of businesses that you can buy from for
Nice.
the holidays kind of thing, if you want to do some corporate gifting. I would often just periodically say, here's a list of wineries, or here's a list of other people who are doing businesses who happen to be Black owned or women owned businesses. So for me, that's what I've been doing. For Black Lives Matter, generally I've been doing, I post and try to do as much education, because a lot of my background was and my studies and my research was around social inequity and structural inequality, and I used to do a lot of diversity education in corporate spaces for a lot of years, particularly here in the Northwest. So I just share a lot of information about historical legacies, historical traumas, the impact of what has happened before, how it's impacting us now, why people are more angry around things than maybe people think they should be, or why Black Lives Matter, and instead of all lives, right? Like right now we're focusing on I don't know if you've watched Difficult Conversations with a Black Man on YouTube. It's a fabulous series, and he actually wrote a book, Oprah found him and helped him write a book, but he does these series called Difficult Conversations with a Black Man, and he made a comment that I thought was so amazing. He had a conversation with Matthew McConaughey, and Matthew was like, so all lives matter, Black lives matter, like what's the deal? And he said, you think of it like this, right now we're dealing with the coronavirus, and that's where all our focus is, because it's the thing that's killing everybody. But it doesn't mean that cancer doesn't matter, or diabetes doesn't matter, or other things don't matter. But what we're focusing on are the things that are killing people ad nauseum, and that we don't have a control over yet, or we're not, is disrupting so many things in our lives. And he said, right now, that's what's happening with Black lives. They're being murdered, they're being killed, and so right now, until we can get this under control, like the coronavirus, then we could put it with the other range of things that we're continuing to work on, but maybe not with the same level of focus that, we're doing like with the coronavirus right now, right? So I just thought that was really interesting. So those are the kind of conversations that I try to keep up and try to have with individuals, so just they can understand the larger context, in terms of what we're talking about. With my clients, it's one of the fundamental things that I talk about, because I work specifically with women and with quite a few women of color around how these issues of what they're feeling and how to deal with that in the workspace, and how to have these conversations within their organizations, how to foster and promote these conversations in the organization, and not just from a conversational perspective, but in response to what are some policy issues, what are some practices in the organization that aren't reflecting their values when they put out these statements saying, we think all Black lives matter.
Right.
My thing has always been, okay, well, then let's make sure that's embedded in the policies and practices and procedures in the organization, because that's the only way to reflect whether or not it matters. And when it doesn't, to be able to speak truth to power, to be able to say you're falling short in your own statement, and using that as a guideline to help organizations really move the needle and step it up when it comes to supporting all their people within the organization.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you got to know where you are to see where you're measuring things. You can't measure the impact in tweets.
Exactly, right. And these things are much more than just a conversation. It's the difficult conversations are necessary to break down the walls, to be able to kind of see some truths. but it takes work and action to actually make a change. Right. So
and you
I
have to
wrote
be conscious about those conversations because they can so easily snowball into like this monster of emotions, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's an emotional thing because it's hard to separate your personal feelings
Right.
around this or your personal experiences around this from the truth. So when people start denying the truth of it, it feels
That
like
you've
you're denying me.
experienced. Yeah, you're like,
Yeah.
I've experienced it firsthand. How
Right,
are you telling
exactly,
me it didn't?
exactly. So
Exactly.
it does become very personal. So the conversations are really challenging, but they're necessary. But it requires some finesse in terms of being able to have the conversations. And that's why in the corporate space, you know, I'm like, the conversations are important, but look at your policies and practices. Let's keep
Yes.
it real. Let's keep it business level. Like we can
Yeah.
still have these conversations and see how they're impacting it in individuals in the organization pretty clearly. That's a measurable standard that you can look at, right? And then you can utilize that to then begin to say, now, why is it happening? To have the conversations around from that perspective. You know, I wrote an article around Forbes around how to do anti-racist work in organizations, and that is actually possible to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Do you ever think back and be like, wow, I've done so many amazing things in my time. Every story you tell, I'm like, and you're like, what this article for Forbes? You know, when I was getting my PhD and like teaching, I'm like, are these all real stories? Are you making this up? Like,
I am
you've
not. I am not making.
unbelievable things and not a lot of time.
Yeah,
Like, where does that come from? Is that
I
your
have
is
been
that your parents?
blessed.
Is that the drive? Like, where does that come from?
It comes from I think it comes from my father. You know, my father was someone who believed in that you can do anything you want and the world is open to you. And so when there's an opportunity presented to me, just like coming into Tuck, it was an opportunity
Right.
that was presented to me. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm that kind of person that, you know, if I can do something where I think I can make a difference or an impact, if there's an opportunity that I think I can grow, learn, and develop from, then I'm all over that. So I consider myself a lifelong learner in that perspective. So I'm always open to things. And, you know, I think and my father was that way too. I just wanted to finish that point. My father was that way too, but I watched him as a Black man who grew up in Mississippi in the 30s and 40s in the military, in a segregated military, who
Wow.
almost got lynched himself,
Wow.
who used to pull people off the trees, who got lynched in his community, um, you know, who tried to fight in his way to be an activist and supportive of you know, Black lives in the Black community, but always with an eye toward not doing anything that would like take him away from his family and his duty to raise and take care of his family. I always saw my father go so far, but always kind of be limited by the things around him. And so he died in 2012, and it was not too long after that I decided to jump in to start my business. And it was actually, I started my business, but I was still working. I didn't quit my job until later after that. But I felt like I was picking up his legacy and carrying it through. So I feel a lot of responsibility to my father, to my family members, to my community, that if we're here for a purpose, and it's our job to discover what that is and to lean into that as many ways and as much as we possibly can. And I think about that with my children and wanted to create a space or create opportunities for them so that they, like my father taught me, don't feel limited by what you can or cannot do. I want them to feel the same way, because trust me, I've got a lot of other messages, you know, telling me what I can't do, what I shouldn't do.
Right.
I remember when I was going to be a lawyer, I had so many people say, well, you know, there's a lot of reading that's really hard, Carol. Can you do that? I remember when I was, you know, applying for colleges, I had went to a Catholic school. I had a white nun saying, well, that's really hard and challenging. All of these things that were coded in racism,
Right.
that it was too challenging for me as either a Black woman or as a girl to do something. And every time I got that, I'm like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do just that.
Yeah.
Because you don't tell me.
Thanks for the encouragement. Yeah, I'm
Right.
definitely going to do it.
Yeah. And so I think that is my father's spirit, you know, within me that has helped to like just really drive me. And so I don't I look back over the things that I've done, definitely with pride, but I don't look back over them to say, look what I've done. I look at them to fuel me to do even more. Like I look at it like to say, well, if I could do that, well, then why can't I do this?
Right. Awesome.
Well, we are going to wrap up. We could obviously talk for a really long
Hours, right?
But before we do that, we like to ask people, we all want to see coronavirus go away, but what is one thing that you'd like to see stay after coronavirus goes away?
I like remote stuff. I realize how much, I'm 56 years, I am 56 years old. I love my house. I do miss traveling, but not as much. I realize how much I was traveling before. I really like the flexibility of being able to do more things this way. And I think that is going to be I love the option. And I think it's the other thing that has been really big is this materialism. And what I mean by that is I realize how much stuff I have that was supporting a lifestyle that I don't have that much anymore because of coronavirus. So the amount of like clothes and the amount of things that I had, I just kind of looked around and I thought, I've been getting rid of so much stuff over the last year. It's not even funny. So it's had me take a different look about what's important and what really matters and where to really lean my attention and time. And so I'm hoping that that is something that continues beyond the coronavirus, that we really look at what matters and not get sucked into or bought into these external ideas of what's true and what matters, but really start honing in more deeply to what really is true and matters for us.
Yeah. It sounds simple, but it does take a lot of work.
It does.
I know.
It takes thought. You have to really think about it and be conscious about what you're doing and why you're doing something. And especially with all this extra anxiety we have right now, it's so easy to say like, oh, if I just buy that thing, it'll help me. If I just do that, it'll help me. If I just eat that thing, it'll help me. And then you're like, I'm still anxious. I'm still anxious.
Yes. Well, I did eat more than I should. That's something I'm trying to correct that this year. That was one thing I didn't. But not getting out more, I realize how much, I need to probably move my body a little bit more. But but just the things, the accumulation of things that I think were maybe once important to me just weren't anymore. And I think, one time I remember Heather and I had a conversation about people having an existential crisis, which is probably what my business was like, oh, I need your help. But I think that also, is helping people think about like really what's important and what matters and focusing in on that more than anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so people are all going to be clamoring to talk to you now. So how can they find you? What's the best way to reach you?
I say the easiest thing is to go to my website, carolparkerwalsh.com, and that will link you out to all kind of other stuff. So you can always find me on social media. I tend to hang out on Facebook and LinkedIn more than anything else. But go to my website and there's resources, there's more information about me, there's videos, and there's links to all kind of other things that I've done. I do a monthly TV segment at our local morning show here in the community. So I have videos from that too, which is really fabulous and fun too.
That's so fun.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
So fun.
And we'll see you all next time on Business Unusual.